Hello. I don't know how long it's been. Welcome. I'm getting distracted. This is what I get for looking something up at the same time as having to start the stream. Hi. Welcome to the stream. I was just trying to see how long it's been since I last streamed. Long enough. I think it's been at least a week because I don't have any VODs that I can see. Anyway. Yes. So, Pride and Prejudice, chapter 26. At the end of the last chapter, because I'm looking at this and it does follow on quite noticeably from the previous chapter. So in the previous chapter, let me think. I believe it's Mrs. Bennet's sister, Mrs. Gardner, has come to visit, and she knew the man that Elizabeth Bennet is currently interested in. Let's say, Mr. Wickham, and or she rather she sort of peripherally knew of him, if you like. She lived in the same region of the country when he was much younger. Anyway, and she has observed that he and Elizabeth are quite close, and so that is where this chapter follows on from. That being said, Pride and Prejudice, chapter 26. Well, that's an auspicious beginning. Mrs. Gardner's caution to Elizabeth was punctually and kindly given on the first favourable opportunity of speaking to her alone. After honestly telling her what she thought, she thus went on: "You are too sensible a girl, Lizzie, to fall in love merely because you are warned against it, and therefore I am not afraid of speaking openly. Seriously, I would have you be on your guard. Do not involve yourself or endeavour to involve him in an affection which the want of fortune would make so very imprudent. I have nothing to say against him. He is a most interesting young man, and if he had the fortune he ought to have, I should think you could not do better. But as it is, you must not let your fancy run away with you. You have sense, and we all expect you to use it. Your father would depend on your resolution and good conduct, I am sure. You must not disappoint your father." "My dear aunt, this is being serious indeed." "Yes, and I hope to engage you to be serious likewise." "Well, then you need not be under any alarm. I will take care of myself and of Mr. Wickham too. He shall not be in love with me if I can prevent it." "Elizabeth, you are not serious now." "I beg your pardon. I will try again. At present I am not in love with Mr. Wickham. No, I certainly am not. But he is beyond all comparison the most agreeable man I ever saw, and if he becomes really attached to me, I believe it would be better than he should not than that. I believe it will be better than that he should not. I see the imprudence of it. Oh, that abominable Mr. Darcy! My father's opinion of me does me the greatest honour, and I should be miserable to forfeit it. My father, however, is partial to Mr. Wickham. In short, my dear aunt, I should be very sorry to be the means of making any of you unhappy, but since we see every day that where there is affection young people are but as we see every day that where there is affection young people are seldom withheld by immediate want of fortune from entering into engagements with each other, how can I promise to be wiser than so many of my fellow creatures? If I am tempted, or how I am even to know or If I am tempted, or how am I even to know that it would be wiser to resist? All that I can promise you, therefore, is not to be in a hurry. I will not be in a hurry to believe myself his first object. When I am in company with him, I shall not be wishing. In short, I will do my best. Perhaps it will be as well if you discourage his coming here so very often. At least you should not remind your mother of inviting him." "As I did as I did the other day," said Elizabeth, with a conscious smile. I'm sorry, it's the word is split in half by what probably should be a subtext. It's annoying. As I did the other day, very true, it will be wise in me to refrain from that. But do not imagine that he is always here so often. It is on your account that he has been so frequently invited this week. You know my mother's idea as to the necessity of constant company for her friends, but really, and upon my honour, I will try to do what I think to be wisest, and now I hope that you are satisfied. Her aunt assured her that she was, and Elizabeth, having thanked her for the kindness of her hints, they parted, a wonderful instance of advice being given on such a point without being resented. Mr. Collins returned to Hertfordshire soon after it had been quitted by the Gardiners and Jane, but, as he took up his abode with the Lucases, his arrival was no great inconvenience to Mrs. Bennet. His marriage was now fast approaching, and she was at length so far resigned as to think it inevitable, and even repeatedly to say in an ill-natured tone that she wished they might be happy. Thursday was to be the wedding day, and on Wednesday Miss Lucas paid her farewell visit, and when she rose to take leave, Elizabeth, ashamed of her mother's ungracious and reluctant good wishes, and sincerely affected herself, accompanied her out of the room. As they went downstairs together, Charlotte said, "I shall depend on hearing from you very often, Eliza." "That you certainly shall. And I have another favour to ask. Will you come and see me? We shall often meet, I hope, in Hertfordshire. I am not likely to leave Kent for some time. Promise me, therefore, to come to Hunsford." Elizabeth could not refuse, though she foresaw little pleasure in the visit. "My father and Maria are to come to me in March," added Charlotte, "and I hope you will consent to be of the party. Indeed, Eliza, you will be as welcome to me as either of them." The wedding took place, the bride and bridegroom set off for Kent from the church door, and everybody had as much to say or to hear on the subject as usual. Elizabeth soon heard from her friend, and their correspondence was as regular and frequent as it ever had been. That it should be equally unreserved was impossible. Elizabeth could never address her without feeling that all the comfort of intimacy was over, and, though determined not to slacken as a correspondent, it was for the sake of what had been rather than what was. Charlotte's first letters were received with a good deal of eagerness. There could not but be curiosity to know how she would speak of her new home, how she would like Lady Catherine, and how happy she would dare pronounce herself to be, though when the letters were read, Elizabeth felt that Charlotte expressed herself on every point exactly as she might have foreseen. She wrote cheerfully, seemed surrounded with comforts, and mentioned nothing which she could not praise. The house, furniture, neighbourhood, and roads were all to her taste, and Lady Catherine's behaviour was most friendly and obliging. It was Mr. Collins' picture of Hunsford and Rosings rationally softened, and Elizabeth perceived that she must wait for her own visit there to know the rest. Jane had already written a few lines to her sister to announce their safe arrival in London, and when she wrote again, Elizabeth hoped it would be in her power to say something of the Bingleys. Her impatience for this second letter was well rewarded, as impatience generally is. Jane had been a week in town without either seeing or hearing from Caroline. She accounted for it, however, by supposing that her last letter to her friend from Longbourn had been by some accident lost. "My aunt," she continued, "is going to-morrow into that part of town, and I shall take the opportunity of calling in Grosvenor Street." She wrote again when the visit was paid, and she had seen Miss Bingley. "I did not think Caroline in spirits," were her words, "but she was very glad to see me, and reproached me for giving her no notice of my coming to London. I was right, therefore, my last letter had never reached her. I inquired after their brother, of course. He was well, but so much engaged with Miss Darcy that they scarcely ever saw him. I found that Miss Darcy was expected to dinner. I wish I could see her. My visit was not long, as Caroline and Mrs. Hurst were going out. I dare say I shall soon see them here." Elizabeth shook her head over this letter. It convinced her that accident only could discover to Mr. Bingley. Sorry, very getting thrown by random sentences. Oh well, you have been warned about my lack of competence and professionalism. It convinced her that accident could only discover to Mr. Bingley her sister's being in town. There we go. Old turns of phrase. 4 weeks passed away, and Jane saw nothing of him. She endeavoured to persuade herself that she did not regret it, but she could no longer be blind to Miss Bingley's inattention. After waiting at home every morning for a fortnight, and inventing every evening a fresh excuse for her, the visitor did at last appear, but the shortness of her stay, and yet more, the alteration of her manner, would allow Jane to deceive herself no longer. The letter which she wrote on this occasion to her sister will prove what she felt. My dearest Lizzie, will, I am sure, be incapable of triumphing in her better judgment at my expense, when I confess myself to have been entirely deceived in Miss Bingley's regard for me. But, my dear sister, though the event has proven you right, do not think me obstinate if I still assert that, considering what her behaviour was, my confidence was as natural as your suspicion. I do not at all comprehend her reason for wishing to be intimate with me, but if the same circumstances were to happen again, I am sure I should be deceived again. Caroline did not return my visit till yesterday, and not a note, not a line, did I receive in the meantime. When she did come, it was very evident that she had no pleasure in it. She made a slight formal apology for not calling before, said not a word of wishing to see me again, and was, in every respect, so altered a creature, that when she went I was perfectly resolved to continue the acquaintance no longer. I pity, though I cannot help blaming her. She was very wrong in singling me out as she did. I can safely say that every advance to intimacy began on her side. But I pity her because she must feel she has been acting wrong, because I am very sure that anxiety for her brother is the cause of it. I need not explain myself farther, and although we know this anxiety to be quite needless, yet if she feels I need not explain myself farther, and though we know this anxiety to be quite needless, yet if she feels it, it will easily account for her behaviour to me, so deservedly dear as he is to his sister. Whatever anxiety she may feel on his behalf is natural and amiable. I cannot but wonder, however, at her having any such fears now, because if he had cared at all about me, we must have met long, long ago. He knows of my being in town, I am certain, from something she said herself, and yet it would seem, by her manner of talking, as if she wanted to persuade herself that he is really partial to Miss Darcy. I cannot understand it. If I were not afraid of judging harshly, I should be almost tempted to say that there is a strong appearance of duplicity in all this. I will endeavour to banish every painful thought, and to think only of what will make me happy. Your affection, and the invariable kindness of my dear uncle and aunt. Let me hear from you very soon. Miss Bingley said something of his never returning to Netherfield again, of giving up the house, but not with any certainty. We had better not mention it. I am extremely glad that you have such pleasant accounts of our friends at Hunsfield. Pray go to see them, with Mr. William and Maria. I am sure you will be very comfortable there. Oh dear. Yours, etc. It's just yours, etc. is the no name. Wonder who it's from. Right. Sorry about that. Just pour some more tea. Oh dear. This letter gave Elizabeth some pain, but her spirits returned, as she considered that Jane would no longer be duped by the sister at least. All expectation from the brother was now absolutely over. She would not even wish for any renewal of his attentions. His character sunk on every review of it, and as punishment for him, as well as possible advantage to Jane, she seriously hoped he might really soon marry Mr. Darcy's sister, as by Wickham's account she would make him abundantly regret what he had thrown away. Mrs. Gardiner about this time reminded Elizabeth of her promise concerning that gentleman, and required information, and Elizabeth had such to send as might rather give contentment to her aunt than herself. Scroll wheels playing up. His apparent partiality had subsided, his attentions were over, he was the admirer of someone else. Elizabeth was watchful enough to see it all, but she could see it and write it off without material pain. Her heart had been but slightly touched, and her vanity was satisfied with believing that she would have been his only choice, had fortune permitted it. The sudden acquisition of £10,000 was the most remarkable charm of the young lady to whom he was now rendering himself agreeable, but Elizabeth, less clear-sighted perhaps in this case than in Charlotte's, did not quarrel with him for his wish of independence. Nothing, on the contrary, could be more natural, and while able to suppose that it cost him a few struggles to relinquish her. Sorry, I should have had that on silent. Where was I? Nothing on the contrary could be more natural, and while able to suppose it cost him a few struggles to relinquish her, she was ready to allow it a wise and desirable measure for both, and could very sincerely wish him happy. All this was acknowledged to Mrs. Gardiner, and, after relating the circumstances, she thus went on: "I am now convinced, my dear aunt, that I have never been much in love. For had I really experienced that pure and elevating passion, I should at present detest his very name, and wish him all manner of evil. But my feelings are not only cordial towards him, they are even impartial towards Miss King. I cannot find out that I hate her at all, or that I am in the least unwilling to think of her a very good sort of girl. There can be no love in all of this. My watchfulness has been effectual, and though I should certainly be a more interesting object to all my acquaintance were I distractedly in love with him, I cannot say that I regret my comparative insignificance. Importance may sometimes be purchased too dearly. Kitty and Lydia take his defection much more to heart than I do. They are young in the ways of the world, and not yet open to the mortifying conviction that a handsome young man must have something to live on as well as playing." Which is the end of chapter 26. I'm just going to check on something very briefly, and then I will continue with chapter 27. I might end a bit earlier than normal. Normally I go for an hour and a half. I might try and call it at about an hour. We shall see. Right. Sorry about that. Chapter 27. With no greater oh, for the love of God. I don't know whether it's because I'm out of practice or just tired or what. I just keep stumbling over my words. It's terrible. At least the room's cooling down now. I've turned the radiator off. Don't know what temperature the thermostat's set to. It's too high. With no greater events than these in the Longbourn family, and otherwise diversified by little walks. No, by a little beyond the walks to Meryton, sometimes dirty and sometimes cold, did January and February pass away. March was to take Elizabeth to Hunsford. She had not at first thought very seriously of going thither, but Charlotte she soon found was depending upon the plan, and she gradually learned to consider it herself with greater pleasure as well as greater certainty. Absence had increased her desire of seeing Charlotte again, and weakened her disgust of Mr. Collins. There was novelty in the scheme, and as, with such a mother and such uncompanionable sisters, home could not be faultless, a little change was not unwelcome for its own sake. The journey would, moreover, give her a peep at Jane, and, in short, as the time drew near, she would have been very sorry for any delay. Everything, however, went on smoothly, and was finally settled according to Charlotte's first sketch. She was to accompany Sir William and his second daughter. The improvement of spending a night in London was added in time, and the plan became as perfect as plan could be. The only pain was in leaving her father, who would certainly miss her, and who, when it came to the point, so little liked her going, that he told her to write to him and almost promised to answer her letter. The farewell between herself and Mr. Wickham was perfectly friendly on his side even more. His present pursuit could not make him forget that Elizabeth had been the first to excite and to deserve his attention, the first to listen and to pity, the first to be admired, and in his manner of bidding her adieu, wishing her every enjoyment, reminding her of what she was to expect in Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always, and trusting their opinion of her, their opinion of everybody, would always coincide. There was a solicitude and interest which she felt must ever attach her to him with a most sincere regard, and she parted from him convinced that, whether married or single, he must always be her model of the amiable and pleasing. Her fellow travellers the next day were not of a kind to make her think him less agreeable. Sir William Lucas and his daughter Maria, a good-humoured girl, but as empty-headed as himself, had nothing to say that could be worth hearing, and were listened to with about as much delight as the rattle of the chaise. That's mean. Elizabeth loved absurdities, but she had known Sir William's too long. He could tell her nothing new of the wonders of his presentation and knighthood, and his civilities were worn out like his information. It was a journey of only 24 miles, and they began it so early as to be in Gracechurch Street, by noon. As they drove to Mr. Gardiner's door, Jane was at a drawing-room window watching their arrival. When they entered the passage, she was there to welcome them, and Elizabeth, looking earnestly in her face, was pleased to see it as healthy and lovely as ever. On the stairs were a troop of little boys and girls whose eagerness for their cousin's appearance would not allow them to wait in the drawing-room, and whose shyness, as they had not seen her for a 12-month, prevented their coming lower. All was joy and kindness. The day passed most pleasantly away, the morning in bustle and shopping, and the evening at one of the theatres. Elizabeth then contrived to sit by her aunt. Their first subject was her sister, and she was more grieved than astonished to hear, in reply to her minute inquiries, that though Jane always struggled to support her spirits, there were periods of dejection. Surprisingly difficult word to say. That's what I get for trying to enunciate. It was reasonable, however, to hope that they would not continue long. Mrs. Gardiner gave her the particulars, also of Miss Bingley's visit in Gracechurch Street, and repeated conversations occurring at different times between Jane and herself, which proved that the former had, from her heart, given up on the acquaintance. Mrs. Gardiner then rallied her niece on Wickham's desertion, and complimented her on bearing it so well. "But, my dear Elizabeth," she added, "what sort of girl is Miss King? I should be sorry to think our friend mercenary. Pray, my dear aunt, what is the difference in matrimonial affairs between the mercenary and the prudent motive? Where does discretion end and avarice begin? Last Christmas you were afraid of his marrying me because it would be imprudent, and now, because he is trying to get a girl with only £10,000, you want to find out that he is mercenary. If you will only tell me what sort of girl Miss King is, I shall know what to think. She is a very good kind of girl, I believe. I know no harm of her. But he paid her not the smallest attention till her grandfather's death made her the mistress of this fortune? No, why should he? If it were not allowable for him to gain my affections because I had no money, what occasion could there be for making love to a girl whom he did not care about, and who was equally poor? But there seems some indelicacy in directing his attentions towards her so soon after this event. A man in distressed circumstances has not time for all those elegant decorums which other people may observe. If she does not object to it, why should we? Her not objecting to it does not justify him. It only shows her being deficient in something herself, sense or feeling. Well, cried Elizabeth, have it as you choose. He shall be mercenary, and she shall be foolish. No, Lizzie, that isn't that. No, Lizzie, that is what I do not choose. I should be sorry, you know, to think ill of a young man who has lived so long in Derbyshire. Oh, if that is all, I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Derbyshire, and their intimate friends who live in Hertfordshire are not much better. I am sick of them all. Thank heaven I am going tomorrow, when I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither... Thank heaven. I am going tomorrow, where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither manners nor sense to recommend him. Stupid men are the only ones worth knowing, after all. Oh dear. You'd almost think Elizabeth went into himbos if you took that out of context. Take care, Lizzie. That speech savours strongly of disappointment. Before they were separated by the conclusion of the play, she had the unexpected happiness of an invitation to accompany her uncle and aunt in a tour of pleasure which they proposed taking in the summer. We have not quite determined how far it shall carry us, said Mrs. Gardiner, but perhaps to the lakes. Presumably that is the Lake District, or what is now the Lake District. I can't think of anywhere else it would be. No scheme could have made it more agreeable to Elizabeth, could have been more agreeable to Elizabeth, and her acquaintance of her acceptance of the invitation was most ready and grateful. My dear aunt, my dear, dear aunt, she rapturously cried, what delight, what felicity! You give me fresh life and vigour. Adieu to disappointment and spleen. What? Okay. What are men to rocks and mountains? Oh, what hours of transport we shall spend! And when we do return, it shall not be like other travellers, without being able to give one accurate idea of anything. We will know where we have gone, and we will recollect what we have seen. Lakes, mountains, and rivers shall not be jumbled together in our imaginations, nor, when we attempt to describe any particular scene, will we begin quarrelling about its relative situation. Let our first effusions be less insupportable than those of the generality of travellers. I have no earthly idea what this section is referring. Well, actually, that's a lie. It's probably referring to travel diaries of people who are going, who are like of explorers. If I had to guess. Right, chapter 28. The odds of it being long enough to be a problem. I'll keep going until the tea runs out. That's what we'll do. When the tea runs out, I will end on the chapter that I'm doing. Right. Every object in the next day's journey was new and interesting to Elizabeth, and her spirits were in a state of enjoyment, for she had seen her sister looking so well as to banish all fear for her health, and the prospect of her northern tour was a constant source of delight. Oh, it's definitely the Lake District. 100%. When they left the high road for the lane to Hunsford, every eye was in search of the parsonage, and every turning expecting to bring it into view. The paling of Rosings Park was their boundary on either side. Elizabeth smiled at the recollection of all that she had heard of its inhabitants. At length the parsonage was discernible. The garden sloping to the road, the house standing on it, the green pales and the laurel hedges, everything declared that they were arriving. I think I'm going to look back now. Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the door, and the carriage stopped at the small gate which led by a short gravel walk to the house, amidst the nods and smiles of the whole party. In a moment they were all out of the chaise, rejoicing at the sight of each other. Mrs. Collins welcomed her friend with the liveliest pleasure, and Elizabeth was more and more satisfied with coming when she found herself so affectionately received. She saw instantly that her cousin's manners were not altered by his marriage. His formal civility was just what it had been, and he detained her some minutes at the gate to hear and satisfy his inquiries after all her family. They were then, with no other delay than his pointing out the neatness of the entrance, taken into the house, and as soon as they were in the parlour, he welcomed them a second time, with ostentatious formality, to his humble abode, and punctually repeated all his wife's offers of refreshment. Elizabeth was prepared to see him in his glory, and she could not help fancying that in displaying the good proportion of the room, its aspect and its furniture, he addressed himself particularly to her, as if wishing to make her feel that she had lost in refusing him. But though everything seemed neat and comfortable, she was not able to gratify him by any sigh of repentance, and rather looked with wonder at her friend that she could have so cheerful an air with such a companion. When Mr. Collins said anything of which his wife might reasonably be ashamed, which certainly was not seldom, she involuntarily turned her eye on Charlotte. Once or twice she could discern a faint blush, but in general Charlotte wisely did not hear it. After sitting long enough to admire every article of furniture in the room, from the sideboard to the fender, to give an account of their journey and all that had happened in London, Mr. Collins invited them to take a stroll in the garden, which was large and well laid out, and to the cultivation of which he attended himself. To work in his garden was one of his most respectable pleasures, and Elizabeth admired the command of countenance with which Charlotte talked of the healthfulness of the exercise, and owned she encouraged it as much as possible. Here, leading the way through every walk and crosswalk, and scarcely allowing them an interval to utter the praises he asked for, every view was pointed out with a minuteness which left beauty entirely behind. He could number the fields in every direction, and could tell how many trees there were in the most distant clump. But all of the views which his garden, or which the country, or the kingdom could boast. No, wait. But of all the views which his garden, or which the country, or the kingdom could boast, none were to be compared with the prospect of Rosings, afforded by an opening in the trees that bordered the park near the opposite the front of the house. It was a handsome modern building, well situated on rising ground. I've overfilled the cup very slightly. There we go. From his garden, Mr. Collins would have led them round his 2 meadows, but the ladies, not having shoes to encounter the remains of a white forest, turned back, and while Sir William accompanied him, Charlotte took her sister and friend over to the house, extremely well pleased, probably, to have the opportunity of showing it without her husband's help. It was rather small, but well built and convenient, and everything was fitted up and arranged with a neatness and consistency of which Elizabeth gave Charlotte all the credit. When Mr. Collins could have been forgotten, there was really a great air of comfort throughout, and by Charlotte's evident enjoyment of it, Elizabeth supposed he must be often forgotten. She had already learnt that Lady Catherine was still in the country. It was spoken of again while they were at dinner, when Mr. Collins, joining in, observed, "God, Mr. Collins, this is going to be the longest bloody monologue imaginable. Insufferable man. Well written on Jane Austen's part, but Yes, Miss Elizabeth, you will have the honour of seeing Lady Catherine de Bourgh on the ensuing Sunday at church, and I need not say you will be delighted with her. She is all affability and condescension, and I doubt not but you will be honoured with some portion of her notice when service is over. I have scarcely any hesitation in saying that she will include you and my sister Maria in every invitation with which she honours us during your stay here. Her behaviour to my dear Charlotte is charming. We dine at Rosings twice every week, and are never allowed to walk home. Her ladyship's carriage is regularly ordered for us. I should say one of her ladyship's carriages, for she has several." "Lady Catherine is a very respectable, sensible woman indeed," added Charlotte, "and a most attractive neighbour." "Very true, my dear. That is exactly what I say. She is the sort of woman whom one cannot regard with too much deference." That was surprisingly brief. It wasn't even a whole page. Actually, hang on. No, it wasn't a whole page. It was split over 2, so I had to check. The evening was spent chiefly in talking over Hertfordshire news. and telling again what had already been written. And when it closed, Elizabeth, in the solitude of her chamber, had to meditate upon Charlotte's degree of contentment, to understand her address in guiding and composure in bearing with her husband, and to acknowledge that it was all done very well. She had also to anticipate how her visit would pass, the quiet tenor of their usual employments, the vexatious nature of Mr. Collins, and the gaieties of their intercourse with Rosings. A lively imagination soon settled it all. About the middle of the next day, as she was in her room getting ready for a walk, a sudden noise below seemed to speak the whole house in confusion, and, after listening a moment, she heard somebody running upstairs in a violent hurry, and calling loudly after her. She opened the door and met Maria in the landing place, who breathlessly, with agitation, cried out, "Oh, Eliza! Pray make haste and come into the dining room, for there is such a sight to be seen. I will not tell you what it is. Make haste and come down this moment." Elizabeth asked questions in vain. Maria would tell her nothing more, and they ran into the dining room, which fronted the lane, in quest of this wonder. It was two ladies stopping in a low phaeton at the garden gate. "Is this all?" cried Elizabeth. "I expected at least that the pigs had gotten into the garden, and here is nothing but Lady Catherine and her daughter." "La, my dear," said Maria, quite shocked at the mistake, "it is not Lady Catherine. The old lady is Mrs. Jenkinson, who lives with them. The other is Miss de Bourgh. Only look at her. She is quite a little creature. Who would have thought she could be so thin and small?" Sorry, one moment. I just have to... Sorry about that. "She is abominably rude to keep Charlotte out of doors in all this wind. Why does she not come in?" "Oh, Charlotte says she hardly ever does. It is the greatest of favours when Mr. Bourgh comes in." "I like her appearance," said Elizabeth, struck with other ideas. "She looks sickly and cross. Yes, she will do for him very well. She will make him a very proper wife." She's talking here about Mr. Darcy, who is... yeah. Mr. Darcy is... I can't remember who it was that suggested the idea. Not the idea, but who said that it was likely. I haven't a clue. But it was probably Mr. Collins. But no, she's talking about Mr. Darcy marrying Miss de Bourgh. Mr. Collins and Charlotte were both standing at the gate in conversation with the ladies, and Sir William, to Elizabeth's high diversion, was stationed in the doorway, in earnest contemplation of the greatness before him, and Sir William, to Elizabeth's highest diversion, was stationed in the doorway in earnest contemplation of the greatness before him, and constantly bowing whenever Miss de Bourgh looked that way. At length there was nothing more to be said. The ladies drove on, and the others returned into the house. Mr. Collins no sooner saw the girls than he began to congratulate them on their good fortune, which Charlotte explained by letting them know that the whole party was asked to dine at Rosings the next day. All right, that is the end of chapter 27, and I think I am going to call it now because it's only 10 to 7, but so I won't end the stream per se. So what will happen now is there's just a couple of things I'm going to look up, so I will switch to screen capture, and then change to entire monitor. There we go, and then get you up. No, there we go. Right, so it's only a couple of things. I highlight, there we go. Fender. I don't know what a fender is. Fender. Let's see. Hang on. I know it's something in a car. It's apparently something in a guitar. A low frame bordering a fireplace to prevent burning coals from falling in. Oh, it's this bit. Yeah, it's like a grate bit on the front of a fireplace. Yeah, did not know that. Who would have thought? Well, I should also just let me click on here and lift this up so that I can see. One, two. There we go. Gotcha. Just in case. Right, so that's one thing, and then I believe the pails. Yeah, the pails. So this is going to give me the obvious, the verb. Pails, wooden stake or posts used to. Oh no, here it is. Historical, an area within determined bounds or subject to a particular jurisdiction. Yeah, so it's the pales. Yeah, so it's basically just the grounds of Rosings. That makes sense. Not a term I've heard used before, but you learn something new every day. And then we have adieu to disappointment and spleen. I'm assuming this is just like frustration or bad temper or spite. Yeah. I don't think. No, that is all that is. Right, so if I jump back down so that it will open again on. Use this one. With no greater events. No, it's not. It was 28. Oh, there we go. There you go, 29. There we are. Right. So the next one will be to switch to here. And then switch to there. There we go. Logic puzzles. Okay. Close you. We will change the stream info in just a moment. See, yeah. Yeah. Let me open the stream info. Open my thing. Right. And then no, that's not right. Let's see, bring chat suggestions. Suggestions welcome. Puzzle. Puzzles. I think that is everything. There we go. Stream info updated. And now I will see. Attempt very briefly. Am I really going to do a full half an hour? No, I'm not. Let's change that to 15 minutes. Because I can't. I'm just tired and a little bit overly warm, which is weird for the time of year, but I have been drinking tea in a room that's been heated by a radiator, so chamomile tea, so, and it's nice. It's nice. It's actually a nice, reasonably cool temperature now. Let's just make this easy. It's because I might actually finish it and do a second one. 750 is either Dr. Jordan or E. Paradolens. Let's see, Dr. Jordan. Jordan is not that one. E. Paradolens is either Ortiz. That's certainly a name. Ortiz. Oops. Or the one with 500 genes. 500 genes was Zamora. Well, 500 was not Ortiz, obviously. And it was Zamora, so yeah, that's annoying. E. Carolinus has 1,000 genes. I get the feeling this is too easy. I may have undershot. B. Mangeris has 250 fewer genes than the organism sequenced by Dr. Jordan. Obviously, for the VOD, if you are watching this bit, I should say that the point, if you like, of this segment is that I take suggestions for random stuff to say from Jack. It could be something as nonsensical as getting me to do a nursery rhyme, or it could be a famous quote, or it could just be something that isn't even a word, or it could be a woo if you really want. Please don't. Anyway, if that is something that sounds interesting to you, you are very welcome to stop by and check out this part of the stream. Anyway, logic puzzles. Where was I? B has 250 fewer than Dr. Jordan. Yeah. Okay, so it can't be that one. 750 is either Jordan or E. Paradolens. Right. E. Paradolens. Oh, there we go. Look. E. Paradolens is either 500 or Ortiz. I feel dreadfully stupid doing this. My brain just doesn't want to put the pieces together. 750 if 750 is E. Paradolens, then it's not Jordan. It has to be Ortiz. Ugh. This is only a moderate. Dear. It's certainly one way to embarrass yourself on the internet. Jordan or E. We know that Beamandra is not Jordan. It means that Jordan is either Carolinus or Wellington. It can't be Wellington because if he's 750, wait, no, he could be. I'm making testificate noises now. Either what is that? I've just discovered this little snake thing in the pencil pot that's on this desk. Let's look at this logically. If E Paradise is 750, and that means Dr. Jordan is E Carolinus, the manager is 750. Yeah. If E Paradise is 750, that means Jordan has to be here, which would mean that Beamandris would have to be here, which means that E Paradise can't be 750. So that has to be like that. That has to be like that. Which means that 500 cannot be Ortiz, which means that 500. Ortiz E Paradise can't be. Oop, what have I clicked? E Paradise is either Ortiz or the one with 500. E Paradise can't be 500, which means it's Ortiz. Zamora is Beamandris. E Paradise isn't 500. 50 fewer than Jordan. Jordan is not Carolinus, which means that Jordan has to be Wellington, which means Wellington. Right. There we go. So now we've just got this last little bit to do. So E Paradise is either Ortiz or 500 genes, which means it's Ortiz, which means there we go. My God, I only had to choose one of the easiest ones, and even still, I did very badly. Oh dear. Let's try again on the same difficulty, see if we can't get slightly better. It'd help if I remembered to start the actual puzzle. The Layou, okay, I don't know how to pronounce that. The L culture had a population size of 750. The X culture had, that's probably Zidat and Garite. One was 850 AD, and one had a population size of 5,000. So 850 is not 5,000. The Garite culture was founded sometime after the culture with 7,500. So we know that Garite is not 7,500, which is already covered. We know that Laila is, which means we know that 7,500 after. So 7,500 and Laila are not 850, and Garite has to be after this. The culture with 5,000 people was founded sometime after the culture with 8,000 people. 5,000 has to be back, 8,000 has to be forward. Of the Garite culture and the Zidat culture, one was founded in 350 AD and the other had a population size of 9,000, so 850 is not 9,000 either, which means 850 AD is the 8,000, which does not help from this one particularly. But, so, the Zidat culture and the Garite culture, one was founded in 850 and one had a population size of 5,000. So, of these two, one is 850. I've done that wrong. The culture with 5,000 people was founded sometime after the culture with 8,000. Yeah, so that's that, that's that, and that. So this is something in here is wrong. Annoying. Oh, good. It's not cheating at all. That does mean that 850 is 9,000, though. So, yeah, Gara and Zidat. Oh, these both are Gara and Zidat. I can't believe I missed that. That's annoying. Okay, so one of them is 305,000. So 350 is 5,000. And the other one is 9,000 is 850. And one of these two is Garite and Zidat. So 3,500 is either Garite or Zidat. There's neither of these, and this one is one of these two. Okay. And Garite can either be 3, Zidat can either. There we go. That's that all neatly lined up. The culture with 5,000 comes after 8,000, so which means that 8,000 has to be 100 AD. Okay. I've got 47 seconds on the clock. Garite was after 7,500, which means the Garite has to be 850, which means the Zidat has to be there, which means that Garite is 9,000 and Zidat is 5,000, which means that this one is 8,000, which is here and here. There we go. Yay! I'm average. Woo! Well, anyone who watched to this point, thank you very much for such a thorough viewing of the VOD. I mean, for all I know, there might be someone here right now. I don't know because they haven't commented. If there is someone here, hello. Sorry, I'm not having a go at you. It annoys me. The view counter doesn't work. Once it goes up to 1, it stays at 1 forever. Ugh, Twitch pumping their numbers, I suppose. Anyway, without any further ado, goodbye and good evening.